All right, so we're going to go into this with the introduction to research and physical activity. And we'll continue this on. I'm kind of going back to the past, future with this. I'm not even sure. Throughout this lecture, I was wanting to put my actual face up here and go back and forth between me and the PowerPoint itself to kind of break things up a little bit. Sometimes, obviously, PowerPoints can be boring. And it's just me kind of speaking over them with a voiceover. So I kind of wanted to have a little bit of mixture of both. However, I'm trying to do both at the same time. And I thought I had to press record on the actual movie recorder on my computer, but I didn't. So most of the way through this, I didn't actually have me, but I still have it recorded through the lecture. Towards the end, I notice it and I do put it up there. So, but it's actually at a good part of the lecture where we start talking about the pseudoscience. So we'll just kind of continue on here with the introduction to research and physical activity. Enjoy. We are going to go ahead and get right into this. The intro to research and physical activity is the title of this chapter from the one textbook, but there's some things that I've put in from other texts, and there's some other good things in the text itself that I certainly included. So we're just going to go through some of the basics of research and science, and even get into a little bit of pseudoscience, which brings up one of the texts that I will actually reference throughout this, at least a couple different times, which is Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World, one of the texts that I said that I tend to like, and to one of the authors that I tend to like as well. But so we'll get into it, and I'll see why I reference that here in a minute. So let's get right into it here. So introduction to research and physical activity, and this can be any research really. When you're really looking at it, the research practices that we have in physical education or physical activity and exercise science, whatever it might be in kinesiology, biomechanics, it's going to be very similar to the research practices in other fields. Now, the major difference obviously is going to be that we are a lot of times dealing with the human body and what some of the reactions are, some of the acute responses, and also the adaptations that occur. But other than that, the stats aren't going to be really any different. The processes of how you go about initiating a research question, literature review, they're all basically going to be about the same. Let's start off with the basic definition of science. So it's a set of methods used to collect information in a particular area. Obviously, in our area, it's likely going to be exercise science. It's going to be something about the human body, maybe some type of training responses to it, whatever it might be. And the goal is you're trying to build a reliable base of knowledge. That's the whole purpose of the research, is to gain knowledge in that particular area. It's the whole reason we do research for anything. So that knowledge obviously is coming from the research that we are performing. We are coming up with a question, and we are maybe testing some other methods. We are testing some other pieces of equipment. We are retesting maybe something else somebody else did. We are trying to see if what the last person did is true or not. And that last person could actually be you. It could actually be you. And that's one of the concepts that I definitely want to get into, is that research and science has this unique perspective in that we are trying to prove the last person wrong. It's essentially what we're trying to do. And again, if that last person was you, then you're trying to prove yourself wrong. You're trying to make it so that we eliminate all the other possibilities that could be happening within that scenario that we just did or somebody just did, and trying to determine what is actually true. And that is coming about through the data that we're collecting, through the analyses that we're doing. It could be statistical analyses. Some of it could be qualitative analyses, but we're trying to figure out what is true and what are the facts about everything. Now, here's the one thing about science and the scientific method in research is that it changes based upon the knowledge that we gain. And that's a good thing. In recent times, the past year or so, we have heard a lot about COVID, obviously, and especially at the very beginning, a lot of things were coming out that sometimes were a little bit confusing. They were, you heard somewhat conflicting data, somewhat conflicting analyses or results from certain studies or certain sources. But that's how science works. It's the unfortunate part of it is that sometimes we're wrong and we need more studies to either prove that that was wrong or what part of that previous study was wrong and where did we mess up? How do we move forward? And what data can we gain throughout the further research? What mistakes did we make before? And what can we correct moving forward? Again, it's one of the unfortunate things is that as we're going through the process of research and understanding what exactly is happening in whatever scenario, whatever we're trying to study, that can be the problem sometimes. It is we get some conflicting results, but that's the reason we continue to do the research. We continue it. Therefore, we're not stuck in this, oh, this one person studied this one thing and it's now fact. No, we need to prove, or not prove, we need to see if that was actually true or not. Proofs are more of a mathematical principle. We are just trying to determine what is more factual. So anyway, that's a little bit of a ramble there, but certainly something to consider when we're looking at science and the scientific method in research. Now we have relevant observations. And those observations, again, are the observations that we have when we're doing a research protocol. So then a scientist, they all have a common goal. They're trying to acquire knowledge through the application of this scientific method. So then obviously a scientist then is somebody who deals with science. But they all have a common goal, is they're trying to acquire knowledge through the application of the scientific method, going through all of these processes. And at the end of it, whatever the data is, the data is. They accept it because that is the scientific method. You accept the results and you try to prove or try to disprove the last person wrong. Again, I use proof and prove a little bit loosely because it's more related. Proof and prove is more related to, the proofs that you did in math class. We're just trying to determine what is closer to the truth and what is more accurate. Probably one of my favorite memes of all times. You guys know I like memes. The one here of Abraham Lincoln. The problem with quotes found on the internet is that they are often not true. And that was by Abraham Lincoln. I think that was somewhere right around 1894, I believe. No, probably wouldn't have been 1894. But anyway, so that is one of the problems that we have with sources, is that we need to be careful about what our sources are, where they're coming from, and we need to be skeptical pretty much of everything. Not necessarily everything, but we still need to have some sort of level of skepticism going through the research process, looking at other research that has been done, other articles that have been written, talking with other professors, talking with other students, talking with other researchers. You need to have a little bit of skepticism. And I even say this in my classes. I don't know if you've heard me say it before, but if you have something that contradicts what I say, I want to know it. I certainly want to know it because I don't want to go through years and years of teaching and then come to find out that I was completely wrong in all those years. If you have a little bit of skepticism, along with the skepticism that I have about what I'm teaching, that helps us both out. If you tell me, hey, this article actually contradicts what you're saying in class, tell me about it. I want to know. I want to know so I can correct it. So moving on a little bit here with the science. So scientists, they must define the parameters, and these parameters can be whatever it is. If we look at exercise physiology, it could be heart rate, it could be blood pressure, it could be how long they're exercising during that physical activity, during that research study. How long is the study? How many times are they coming in for the study? How old are the people? We'll get into some of these about the subject characteristics later on as well. And they also seek out relevant information. And some of this is dealing with the preliminary work of getting into a research study, the literature review. So that literature review is what has everyone else or most everyone else done beforehand. What is the consensus around that central idea that you were trying to convey and trying to study? And they also need to have proposed solutions for the rigorous testing as well. So these testing procedures, they need to be rigorous. They need to be standardized. Now you can come up with some testing procedures that are new, but you need to test those against ones that have already been vetted in the past through numerous research protocols. But there needs to be some sort of rigorous testing that goes on. It needs to be standardized. And again, this scientific method leads to skepticism about what he or she is going to be hearing or reading. We all need to be skeptics about almost everything that we see or hear, especially now. We have a lot of times where we might see a source that is, it sounds almost too good to be true. And sometimes that might lead into the confirmation bias that we all have, at least a little bit of it. And we'll get into some of the biases later, but the confirmation bias is basically you either seek out sources that are going to basically state what you already believe, or you are going to gravitate towards those sources that more often than not conform to your beliefs about whatever topic it is. It could be any topic. I'm not talking about some of the social topics, but I'm even talking about even exercise or exercise physiology, any type of training. But we still need to have that level of skepticism as we go through this process, because it's very important that we get rid of some of the fluff. We vet the sources. We determine which sources are more reliable. And then we can build upon those sources to build our literature review then moving forward. Now, the one thing too is that humans are curious. We are curious creatures. We have the ability to be able to ask questions. Evolution has brought us to this point so far that we are able to have these weird sounds and clicks and noises that we make. And we can move those and position those into what we call sentences and then ideas. And then we can write them down. We can post them on the internet and do whatever we want to. But we can post these questions. We have a brain that is developed enough to where we can ask big questions. Really, really, really deep questions. Just not philosophical questions, but questions about, let's just simplistically give an example. How do the muscles grow? How do we get stronger during weight training? Why? How does that process actually happen? At some point, somebody has asked that question way back when, and we were able to go through a lot of different research processes and the scientific method to determine how the muscles actually grow during that weight training and during really any type of training. How do they adapt to the type of training that we're putting upon them? So we're very, very curious creatures. Not to say that there's not other animals that aren't curious. I mean, I have, my wife and I have two dogs and two cats, and they're pretty curious as well, especially the cats. But anyway, I digress. So humans want explanations for things that happen, either to us or within the natural world. We are just wanting to know why and how something happens. Why? Well, one thing, why are we even here? How did we get here? Some questions, kind of referring back to Carl Sagan. He asked, or he was in an interview one time, and he was saying about if you go into a kindergarten class, there's very curious people in that class. The students, these little kids are asking really deep questions. Now, we might not think of them as deep, but they really are. Why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? I mean, things like that there's an answer to, and there's a scientific process of how to get to that answer. Now, we do know some of these things, and you can read about it pretty much anywhere that you look up science. But again, Some places might be incorrect, so you need to have a little bit of skepticism, at least about the sources. But for the most part, we know some of those basic questions, or the answers to those basic questions. But we're curious, even from a young age. Now, he also said in that interview, once you get to 12th grade, you go into a 12th grade class, that level of curiosity kind of disappears a little bit. Something happened between kindergarten and 12th grade. That's what I hope this class does. And really, all of college should do that. It should open up that vigor of getting into, maybe not going into a research field, but starting to ask some of these deep questions again about that particular field that you're in. Now, again, I mentioned confirmation bias before, but it is here in the slide as well. So you're seeking out information that conforms to the beliefs that one has. We see this a lot in politics. No matter if you're on the right or left, there's probably going to be some people that watch certain news networks, depending upon if they believe more of in a Republican sort of way or a Democratic sort of way. Talk about the two-party system, conservative, liberal. They're probably going to watch two completely different news networks, likely. And they could get their sources from certain places. And a lot of that has to do with the confirmation bias that they receive from that. We, as researchers, as scientists, we try not to have this, although it's a tough thing to break. It is very, very difficult for anybody to break because we want to feel comfortable in our beliefs. We feel, I don't want to say ashamed, but we feel really strange about letting go of some of those beliefs that we've held on to, sometimes for years, all of our lives possibly. And now we have some data in front of us that says otherwise. That's a hard pill to swallow. So therefore, we need to make sure as scientists, we step back from it with new eyes and look at everything a little bit differently. And anytime data comes along to contradict what we believed before, we need to really dive deep into it and figure out, are those beliefs actually accurate? Do they conform to what is actually true? And just trying to take away some of those biases that we have. Now, the scientific method is the best approach to these answers. It is the best way for us to get better information about any topic, the scientific method. And part of the scientific method then is getting it vetted in the public sphere, but even before that, getting it vetted within the field. And we'll get into peer-reviewed literature here later on as well, but a very, very important concept to it. But the scientific method is the best way for us to get these answers that we're all curious about. Now, is there science in our everyday lives, and where is it? You can maybe think of some places you might see this. I brought up politics earlier, and one of the places you'll see it is in polls, political polls. That's a scientific process through some of those. That's a popular way that you might see things if you're not into politics. Don't worry about it. More power to you, actually, if you're not into politics. But one that we have certainly seen over the past year or so is COVID. We see it almost every single day. It didn't matter if you watched the news or not. I tried not watching the news too much. I just tried to get the information that I felt like I needed to get to keep up on what was going on. And the biggest thing, though, that we had to go through this past year was wearing masks during class. There was, there's a lot of research out there that shows that the masks do help to reduce the spread of some of these diseases, just not COVID, but other respiratory diseases. But there's science behind that, and we seen it, and there was some controversy, at least at the beginning. We might be able to talk about some of that when we have some chats, especially with Fauci saying, don't wear the masks, or, it's kind of stupid to do it when he should have been a little bit more truthful. We can go into maybe some of that, but the masks are somewhat important, and it did help us. Although it was an inconvenience to some of us, it still sucked. I felt like I probably ate more cat hair because it was always on my mask than any other time in my life. And anytime we hear of if you watch the news at any point in time, or if you on any social media, you will see links at times to new findings in research. It could be a new planet they found, a new habitable planet, a possibly habitable planet out, 50,000 light years away or wherever it is. It could be something to deal with nutrition. That's the one I see a lot. Coffee is probably one that I see quite a bit. It almost seems like every other month they switch back and forth between coffee is going to kill you tomorrow, or, oh no, it's actually going to cure cancer. Those are the two extremes, and whether or not there's actually been any data on either one of those, probably not. But what I'm saying is one month it's not really good for you. And then a little bit later, there's another study that comes out and says, it's kind of good for you actually. But that's a good thing that we're continuing to research it and move forward with it. But we see these findings all the time. We click on links about these findings through social media, either Facebook, Twitter, maybe not so much on Instagram, maybe a little bit. You might see, depending upon who you're following, you might see some scientific links maybe in their bio or something like that, or maybe they'll have a picture and have a little bit of a blurb about what a new scientist has actually come up with or found in that way. But we see it all throughout our lives, every single day. And even just the simple fact of us driving. How about that? Driving. There's been research on what the speed limits should be, how wide the road should be, what the material should be going into the cars, into the tires. We are here today because of all the millions of, billions of dollars, possibly trillions of dollars going into scientific research, and all the time, oh my goodness, the massive amount of time that is being spent into this to not just do one study and figure it out and then be like, okay, that's the way we need to do everything from now until the end of time and everything's going to be honky-dory. No, we continue to research it. We continue to improve upon the technology. We continue to improve our knowledge of it. That's the scientific process. We try to either prove the last person wrong or try to at least build upon what they started and then moving forward. And that's why we're here today. And 100 years from now, they're going to look back on us, the students and the professors are going to be like, boy, those were primitive people. My goodness, they actually had computers, like physical computers in front of them. I get this big desktop in front of me with a little wee camera, and I got, basically barn lights right here. And like, that's how you guys communicated at times, and how you did online teaching and how you did online communication. I mean, in the future, the microphones probably are going to change. Imagine at some point the technology in a lot of these microphones are kind of old, but we're moving forward. In the past year, we've had a major expanse in the technology of online learning and online communication. And it's only going to get better because of the research that is going on with that. So again, just in our everyday lives, we see it all the time. All right. Now in science, there's this concept of pseudoscience. That's this kind of out of the way area that probably isn't talked about nearly enough, but it should be, because this is the stuff that becomes dangerous. This is the false science that we have. There's a little bit of science involved in it, but it takes it a little bit too far and either exaggerates it or just makes it completely false. So these are ideas based on some of the theories that are put forth as scientific, but they're not actually scientific. Probably the biggest examples of this are going to be within the supplement field. There's a lot of pseudoscience that is in some of those supplements that we see on the shelves, but they're not always going to be factual in terms of what the claims are. They haven't been vetted. They haven't gone through the scientific process. Sometimes they haven't even been deemed to be healthy. Now they might not cause any major harm, but we still don't exactly know what they're going to cause, if they can cause anything. So that's some of the problem there. All right. This is a moment in time where I want to do a little bit behind the scenes. I forgot to press record on the actual video. So there was a couple times I was actually going to put video into this video of me, and I wasn't able to because I forgot to press record, but I do have at least the lecture up here, but you'll have the audio as well. But we're kind of back here and you can actually see my face. This is kind of a good thing. So anyway, I'm going to go back and record at least the intro to it. But with the pseudoscience, there's a couple references I'm going to have to this book, the book with Carl Sagan, The Demon Haunted World. I'm just getting into it. It's been a book that I've been wanting to read for quite a while now. You can find this in paperback. I'm a kind of a hardback guy. I'm sure you can find it on Kindle or whatever if you want to read it. It's actually kind of a long read. It's 400 and some pages, and it's kind of old. The copyright date on it, I believe, is in the 94, 95. I'm getting it out right here. Just hold on one second. 1995 by Carl Sagan. But it's actually some of the quotes and some of the blurbs that I've read. I've gone through about the first 2 chapters now. But some of the other quotes I've seen from it, excellent, and really tie into what we're talking about here with the pseudoscience. And it's something that is very key. There was the story that he went to in the first chapter. He was going, I can't remember where he was going now, but he was in a limo. There was a chauffeur that was taking him somewhere, and there was a guy that said, "Oh, you're the science guy. I have some questions for you." So he was asking these questions, and they were pseudoscience questions. They were things. I don't know if they were tarot cards or about some of these really kind of off the wall ideas that we see a lot of. Fortune telling, and he goes into some of that within the book. He talks about that. These appeal to us. These appeal to us really, really well. And in fact, there's a quote here that I want to go into. It says, "Naturally, people try various belief systems on for size to see if they help. And if they're desperate enough, we become all too willing to abandon what may be perceived as the heavy burden of skepticism. And pseudoscience speaks to powerful emotional needs to the science often leaves unfulfilled." So there's some level of possible bias in this, or some sort of feeling where the science just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it fills you up with joy. Sometimes it can be boring. It's boring answers, and maybe it's not answers that you want to hear, but it's still science. However, the scientific method or the pseudoscience does give you those answers a lot of times. And that's where we get into a lot of the research, or a lot of the pseudo research and pseudoscience within supplements, is that you might see someone there and the ad with a lab coat. "Oh, I did the science on this, and I did research on this, and it helps you lose weight, 50 pounds within 2 weeks. And that's kind of an extreme case, but that's just pseudoscience. And sometimes they're just blatantly telling you a lie a lot of times. But that gives a comforting answer. The uncomfortable answer that doesn't fulfill us is that this product has a little bit of science behind it, but it doesn't work the way that the company claims. So unfortunately, you're probably not going to lose any weight, or at least no more than if you would have done the exercises and ate properly beforehand. So there you go. Another quote I wanted to bring into this as well, which really kind of sums this up, is that science arouses soaring sense of wonder. It does. It's a fantastic method to get some of these answers, these good questions we have, we get answers for. But he goes on to say, but so does pseudoscience. And that can be the problem at times, is that we have the pseudoscience that is infecting us, especially in social media now. Anybody can be, quote unquote, a scientist now and propagate a lot of misinformation moving forward. And that's the problem with this, is that we need to be careful about where the sources are coming from, how they're getting their information. And again, having that level of skepticism when we read something or see something. So let's move on here, and we're going to look at kind of a list of science versus pseudoscience and some of the findings that we might see, some of the statements that we might see. So let's go into this real quick. So the science side of things. So findings that are published in peer-reviewed publications using standards for honesty and accuracy, and they're aimed at scientists. Now, they're usually then brought out to the public, and the public is able to get that information. So that's the dissemination of the information that we have. That's one of the last steps. So we have the findings that are published. They're peer-reviewed, which means that at least a few different people within that area, within that field, have read it, have taken it apart, have said, hey, this needs fixed or that needs fixed, just not edited, actually vetted. Were the methods sound? Did you recruit the right subjects? Did you do the right data analysis? Were the conclusions proper, based upon the data that you collected? Those types of things. In pseudoscience, the findings are disseminated to the general public via sources that are not peer-reviewed. And that's the key difference, is that we have the peer review process within the scientific area. Now, there could be some issues with the peer review process, and we might get into that possibly if we have some discussions. But the findings disseminated to the public in sources that are not peer-reviewed, that's usually the pseudoscience. Not to say that that information is not, or doesn't at least have a little bit of correct information in it, but we need to have some professional vetting, people who have some sort of credentials for it. So there's no pre-publication review for precision or accuracy or to determine whether or not the methods were proper or not. The next one here, experiments must be precisely described and be reproducible, and reliable results are demanded. The reproducibility is the key. What I was saying before about being able to prove the last person wrong, well, the only way to prove the last person wrong is if you can reproduce all of that. If you can reproduce the methods, if you can reproduce the procedures, you don't necessarily have to reproduce the actual findings, because that's important as well. That proves that, well, maybe there's something else going on here, because that person had this conclusion, I have this conclusion, but we did exactly the same thing. Then maybe something else went haywire in one of our studies. So we need to do another study to figure out which one of us was wrong, and then continue on from there. For the pseudoscience side of things, the studies, if any, they're kind of vaguely defined. They can't be reproduced easily. They maybe have some vague methodology. They maybe have some strange data analysis that's going on, and the results just can't be reproduced because of that. On the science side of things, again, we have the scientific failures are carefully scrutinized and studied for reasons for failure. We scrutinize them. That's the peer review process. That's also just not, even before you get to the peer review process, the other people that are involved in the study try to, get together and say, hey, what are we doing wrong? Are we doing anything wrong? How can we improve this before we even try to take it to publication? For pseudoscience, those failures are ignored. They're minimized. They're somewhat explained away, and they're either rationalized or they're just hidden. They just completely, they know about it, but they're going to hide it, because sometimes those failures could actually produce an answer that is very fulfilling. Going back to the pseudoscience, fulfills that nice void that we have at times. In the science side of things, also, we have over time and continued research, more and more is learned about the scientific phenomena. That's what I've been saying this whole time, is that we just continue to do the research on that particular topic, and we continue to build upon the literature that we already have. There's no underlying, on the pseudoscience side, there's no underlying mechanisms that are identified, and no new research is actually done on it. So there's no progress that's actually made on this. There's just kind of nothing there. It's like the initial statement of what they found, or a statement that somebody said, but no one has even vetted it. That's where we need to have some skepticism. If we don't have that scientific process behind it. Now, it's not to say that you can't say, hey, giving a perfect example. Somewhere at some point, somebody said, hey, we need to static stretch for us to warm up. For years, decades, nobody studied it. Nobody even thought about it. We just took it as fact. but it was actually pseudoscience. We knew that it maybe helped the body, but we didn't know how it helped the body until dang near 20, 25 years ago. We finally started to study it and we figured out, yeah, it's really not as good as we thought it was. And then we're building upon that as well. Then if static stretching isn't as good as what we thought it was, what is good? Is it dynamic stretching? Is it PNF stretching? We can move forward then. On the science side, we have idiosyncratic findings and blunders that are averaged out and don't affect the actual phenomena under the study. Try to eliminate as many errors and as many outside influences as possible. If there's a subject or a data point that just is just a complete outlier or something screwed up within that protocol, you throw it out. On the pseudoscience side, those findings, they provide the only identifiable phenomenon. So they tend to harp on those findings versus throwing them out saying, hey, these are not the norm within what we've seen. No, they'll actually boost those up a little bit. So on a product, a weight loss product, if most of the people maybe didn't lose any weight, maybe lost a couple pounds, but then you have 3 or 4 people out of 100 that lose 20 pounds or 30 pounds within the first month, then they're going to say those people, they're going to boost those people up. But that's actually, those are outliers compared to the rest of the population within that study. So again, being very careful with that. But again, the whole thing is that should be vetted within the scientific process. The peer review process should go through and say, hey, wait a minute, why are you pointing out these 3 people that lost this weight when the vast majority of the 97% of the population in your study didn't lose any weight or lost a minimal, insignificant amount of weight throughout the study? So anyway, and then on the scientific side, we have scientists convince others based on evidence and research findings. So making the best case permitted by existing data, and then old ideas are discarded in the light of new evidence. That is the biggest key. And that's the whole point of the scientific method, is that if we need to, we can take those ideas that we once had, that we once thought were true, were accurate, and we can throw those out if new data comes along that says otherwise. And there's no problem with that. That's the whole process. That's why we're doing it. However, on the pseudoscience side, attempts to convince based upon belief and faith rather than facts. And there's kind of the old, definition or saying that faith is just belief without facts, right? There's no facts to kind of back up some of the claims that, whoever is putting forth the information. So the belief encouraged in spite of the facts, not because of them. So the ideas are never really discarded. They just either continue or they meld into something else, possibly even worse. We've seen this a lot in the past year with some of the, some of the data coming out about COVID, and people were holding on to certain beliefs, either about masks or vaccines or whatever it may be. And they just ran with some of the old facts that we had and some of the pseudoscience behind it. And then there was obviously a lot of, and you go down a real rabbit hole with conspiracy theorists and 5G networks and all this stuff. And it can get crazy. It can get super, super crazy. There's a little bit of science there about, vaccines or masks or whatever it might be, but then they take it to a whole new level. Man, it is just something unbelievable. Then the last one here, the scientist has no personal take in the specific outcome of the study. Again, going back to any type of biases that we have, we don't care necessarily what the data says. We just want to get the data and then get moving forward. That's what we want to do. That's the whole process. There is sometimes a danger in science, though, and I do want to say this. There's sometimes a danger in science to where we have this drive to produce results that are significant, especially in our field, in exercise physiology, because that's sexy. It's sexy to see the headline or the title, or even look through an abstract that says, there was a significant increase in this or that, or there was significant weight loss, or there was a significant amount of muscle mass gain through this type of training, whatever it might be. But if there is no significance, statistical significance, that's still significant, in that you still found the answer. You asked the question, you went through the process of trying to answer that question, and it was answered. It was no significant difference between group A and group B. That's it. You shouldn't have hurt feelings about it. Yeah, it might be like, oh boy, I thought it was going to be this. You're like, wow, I really thought that this was going to, change things or revolutionize the fitness industry or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, it's, we'll move on. We'll take this data, maybe try to reproduce the results, maybe try to continue the study in a different manner. But you still got the answer. That's the whole point. The pseudoscience side of things, there are serious conflicts of interest. Somebody's usually paid. There's usually a bias that is there. There's a personal influence on the study itself. So they make their living on the pseudoscience that this is. The supplement companies are probably the biggest ones. Again, not all the supplements are dangerous or don't work. Some of them probably do work at least a little bit, but probably not as much as what they want you to or what they lead on that they work, how much they actually work. And there's other areas too about this as well. So I think we're going to wrap this part up here. This was just part one of kind of the first chapter. I just wanted to get into some of the introduction to research and really kind of go into some of the details about, the scientific method, and we'll get into a little bit more details later on, but the introduction to the scientific method, and talk about pseudoscience, because it has enveloped our world, especially in the past year. And I really try to harp on that, in that we want to be as scientific as possible. We want to try to step back and just maybe knock ourselves upside the head and have amnesia about any other biases that we have, and just move forward with whatever the data says. And that's the whole point of the scientific process. So anyway, thank you for watching this part one, and I'll get into part two here next. Just kind of finish this part up here, continuing on with the science. But if you are interested, and if you want to start reading, again, you don't have to, it's not an assigned reading or anything, but I will start to maybe recommend some books. And Carl Sagan's definitely one of those authors. I have a few of his books. I have Cosmos, Pale Blue Dot, read them when I was a really young lad. But this one, just starting to read Carl Sagan, The Demon Haunted World. I don't know if I can get that in focus. My lights are super, super bright, but I will maybe put a link here in the description. So anyway, if you have any questions, any comments, anything like that, go ahead and let me know. Thanks for watching. And I apologize for not having my face in view earlier on. I'll remember to try to press record. I'm trying to do multiple different things at once, but take care.